Oh, Foxy, it's your birthday. Not for real, just for play. This is Cree Summer, and Moana Nui will be right back.
Aloha mai kakou. Welcome everybody to the Moana Nui podcast. Today we are relaunching maybe, a new segment in partnership with Pō Mahina Designs. We're super excited because we really enjoyed this when Kanoelani was doing it a couple of years ago. And so we're happy to be rebirthing this great mana'o into this space. It is our Mana Bomb segment. And we're really excited because this is like little nuggets, little tidbits that you can take and apply to your life. But before we jump in, again, I just want to welcome Kanoelani into the space. It's really awesome to have her with us and to be collaborating with her. So aloha tita.
Aloha. Aloha mai kakou. My name is Kanoelani Davis. I come here through Mana Bombs, powered by Pō Mahina Designs. Just to give a little tidbit about who we are and what we do before we start our first episode, just to orient everybody. Mana Bombs was created, almost maybe 8 or 9 years ago, 7, maybe even just about that time, just because it was a point in which we used it. I personally used it as a tool to heal from some very toxic situations. In that, every morning I woke up with these thoughts or mana'o that came from nowhere, guiding me to move in a direction for my own personal health and well-being. And while I was going through that, I felt that by sharing it, it helped solidify my accountability to myself. What I didn't know at that time was that it was also helping others. And I think that was the biggest part about how Mana Bombs became more and more accessible to more and more people. There was a lot of similar and relatable situations in which we all could derive from. And so although that's kind of in the past, and I feel really great about where I am today, the mana'o, the thought processes, the dreams, the things that I wake up every morning with still come through. I almost feel like it's purposeful in so many different ways. And so Mana Bomb still continues to live on. Mana Bomb still continues to help others. And it also, to be honest with you, keeps reminding me of the path I need to stay on so I can stay healthy, so I can manage my emotions, manage my mental health and well-being, and manage just a lot of the things that are happening around me. So Mana Bombs is here to aloha everyone. And just so you folks know, for those who are tuning in that don't know Hawaiian, I will be using Hawaiian here and there. I use it either in olelo no eau form or proverbs, or I'll use it in just, kind of pidgin, broken English, where I'll bring in Hawaiian words. I'll do my best to make sure that I translate that. So if you're listening in and you didn't understand a certain section, please feel free to ask that question in the comments. And then also for the fact that, if you have questions or something permeates within you and you need to understand it better, feel free to comment. And we'll get to that. We'll get to that. If it's not at the next episode, then it's going to be, in the comments itself. So Mana Bombs basically means it's another way to say truth bombs, right? It's another way to share some real reality, some radical honesty, some radical aloha. And that I learned that from Kalenu Uhiva, who says that often and makes sense to me. And with Mana Bombs, we're here to just drop some real truth and real reality for us to embrace, accept, and a tool to use to move forward. So I just want to preface that to orient everybody. Welcome to Mana Bombs, powered by Pō Mahina Designs. And we are so grateful to be partnered with Moana Nui podcast.
Yes, aloha. I love how you put that, because I feel like Mana Bombs in and of itself, at least for me, the way I received it on my end was like, oh, this is my self-reflection. Like, it's all about self-awareness and like you said, reminding yourself recenter, to come back, to reground. And I think it's super relative to today's mana bombs that I chose because let me bring it up real quick. Let's see.
Yeah, I can't wait to just dive in. There's so much, and if you can't, as Moana's pulling that up, if you don't listen to this one, check out Pō Mahina Designs, check out Moana Nui podcast. I'm sure we'll both be posting some of the mana bombs and topics that we're going to be talking about.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. So today's mana bomb is don't be afraid to unpeople, unfriend, unfollow, unfamily, uncousin, uncoworker, anyone that drains your mana. Ooh, and you hit so many different aspects, because I think sometimes people don't realize that it's not just strangers that can drain your mana. Sometimes it's the people that's close to us. Yeah. So when I was thinking about this, I was like, oh man, this particular one requires somebody to be self-aware, and that is not necessarily the case. But I think for me, like, the message that came was like, oh, managing your mana, managing your energy, and even like where you invest and let people share your space, share your energy, like setting those boundaries, all of that is a part of self-care. Like, self-care doesn't always mean like go massage and paint my toenails, right? Like, sometimes self-care is just like, okay, wait, let me check in with myself. Like, am I a part of the thing that is feeding the drama, right? Like,
Exactly.
was that kind of like where you were coming from when you originally came out with this thought?
Yeah, so you'll find that like the mana bombs such as this, right? They're common. You'll see them in other people's posts or other people's things. What's unique about perhaps mana bombs in this essence is that a lot of the mana'o happens in the caption, and they will happen based off of my own personal experiences, whether they worked or not. And some of the things I get to witness. A lot of what mana bombs entails is this thing we call ho'amana, which is a healing process. It requires self-awareness. It requires you to be your first medicine and your first healer. And that's hard to accept when we know that we have all these external resources. So let's just dive in, right? Don't be afraid to unpeople, unfriend, unfollow, unfamily, uncousin, uncoworker, anyone that drains your mana. Growing up in Hawaii, if you know and you're about my age, then you heard the word, oh, that person is uns. And that's the one thing that I remembered, when I started to write this and I thought about it, I was like, ooh, uns, she's uns, and so if you're my age, lived in Hawaii, you know what I'm talking about, right?
100%.
Right. Okay. So like that's kind of like that mana'o, that thought process. And so here's the thing. There's a big part of this process in which we have to accept the reality, right? Yeah. We have to accept the fact, like, we might lose a loved one. We might have to hurt somebody's feelings. But I want to also touch upon the other side of that. Like, if somebody unfriended us, uncoworkered us, or us, like, we also have to accept that's what it is, right? And the reason for that is there's people outgrow, and to assume that we're always growing and we're always leaving people behind, you gotta assume the opposite. People are outgrowing you and you're being left behind. And so what happens on both situations is this idea of holding on to something that's not ours anymore, or that's not in our space or our mindset anymore. So the folks who have outgrown others, we don't want to hurt other people's feelings. We don't want to say like, oh, I want to outgrow you in this space, I gotta leave you behind, you're only draining my mana. But on the other end of the spectrum is like, how come they left? How come they're not talking to me? Like, did I do something wrong? And maybe perhaps you didn't do anything wrong. Maybe perhaps they just grew out of that. And so you have to also in turn accept the fact, like, people are going to move forward. People are going to move at a different pace from you. And they're probably at that same point in which they don't want to hurt your feelings. They don't know how to tell you, kind of want to outgrow you. So like, when we talk about this, we got to talk about it from both sides, the junk side of being hurt and the side of having to hurt somebody. But at the end of the day, the intention is never to hurt, right? But it's also, where's that fine line between not hurting somebody, but also giving up of yourself? Because that's the hard part, especially if you see the good in others. If you're like me, you always see the good in others, right? We always see situations or projections. We know that there's something there that aside from who they are, but see, we can't fix that for people. They have to do the same work that you're doing for yourself. That's only fair. That's literally only fair. And so I think with this Mana Bomb, it was mainly to get people to understand, like, you have to be okay with letting go. You have to be okay with walking away. And it hurts and it sucks. But that doesn't, I want to preface something. Everybody thinks of everything being permanent. Remember, there is impermanence. It doesn't mean, maybe you got to walk away for a little while. It doesn't mean you got to walk away forever. That person might catch up and y'all are in the same space. And then you can have that reconnection again, you know, and I think part of that, and as you level up and you start to grow, you also know your limitations. You don't have to get rid of them all the way, but you have your limitations. And that's where those ipapo haku come in, right? Those boundaries that you set so that can still occur. There still can have a relationship, but you also have to remember time, money, and energy. Like, how much of it are you willing to invest into that space that may or may not be giving you anything in return? And so you have to look at it like that, because sometimes, you know, we stay in toxic relationships because we're scared to hurt the other person, because you are a good person. And we stay in toxic spaces because you don't want to hurt anybody because you're a good person, you know? So I don't know. Those are some things I wanted us to think about and really take into consideration when it comes to unning people. And, you know, like, be uns.
Yeah.
AKA, you don't want to be the one that is un.
So I'm so glad you brought that up, because I hadn't heard that in so long. But as soon as you said, I was like, oh my God. Yes, you don't want to be so uns.
Yes.
But yes. I'm glad that you brought up both sides of it, because I mean, yeah, like, when people are growing, it's phases, and sometimes, like you said, we can take it personal, but really it's not. And if I kind of come at it like, there are friends that I have that I don't have to be up under them all the time, but I know they're there, right? Like, we're living life, and when we come back together, you know, it's like nothing changed. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we're not friends anymore. But I think so too, like, even with sometimes family, and I think I'll maybe relate it to like, okay, so like when we're in Hawaii, you know, like, a lot of our family, we have very close family ties. But then, you know, with like the way family units are changing and people like move to the continent, and like, there's just these relationship evolutions that kind of happen. And part of it is also, I think, like, giving people space to do the growing, right? In what you were saying. So I feel like there's just so many ways that this can be applied, whether it's like you older like us, or even if like you are younger and you're kind of like navigating friendships, you know, you're coming out of being like with your family, and you're now going to be a college student, you know, like, there's all of these different kind of facets that this can apply to. And then I think one more additional dimension I would maybe add is that, like, the other thing is, like, you can un-you. Like, don't be afraid to separate yourself from like previous versions of you and embrace like the growth that you have had too, right? Like, don't fall into like the old habits. Don't keep repeating that stuff because you overcame it for a reason, right? So I think that's the other part that also like stood out to me.
Yeah. Well, we always say that we're creatures of comfort. And that just basically means is we only know what we know. I say that constantly. We can't know what we don't know. And so give yourself permission to know what you don't know. And the reason why we don't know those things, or we don't get past that part, is because we have fear, right? The fear is basically, you know, Will there be aloha for me later? Are they going to hate me? Are they going to be mad at me? What if they go out and talk shit about me?
Right.
Those things you gotta kind of like if you're growing, grow, like don't stop. Those things don't matter, and you'll find that, and in time that looks differently. And like how you said, we're older, right? Like we are older. We've been kind of there, done that, so it's easier to accept. I will be honest, like as people unfollow, unfriend, and move on, as soon as they're like, Kanoe, I cannot anymore, I'm like, okay, bye. Like I don't even argue. They probably wait for me to validate, argue, and call them to come back. And I'm like, I was just waiting for the day. I'm all about like, I don't want to push anybody out. I have a lot of patience, but then at the end of the day, if I'm celebrating your God, I'm like, that's just because I was waiting. And sometimes, but I have that patience. Not everybody has that patience, and I don't have to indulge in a lot of that stuff, and I think with this, it reminds us of, are you telling yourself you've grown, or did you actually grow? And that's the test. Because a lot of the times we talk, we talk more than we do, literally, and then we talk more to ourselves to convince ourselves that we've done these things, when clearly through our actions, it has not happened. That's the radical honesty we need to get to. I walk into so many spaces because of the work that I do, and I listen to people talk and I watch them move. It doesn't match. I'm healed. I'm a healer. And it's like, honey, you can't be a healed healer when you're still in the same patterns of destruction and chaos. How do you become the example or the experience in which you can speak from to help others move out of that space? And so the un part is, it really tells you you're leveling into another level. And it doesn't have to come with hate. It doesn't have to come with hurt. And it doesn't have to come with permanence. It just has to come. It just has to happen. And otherwise we will continue that cycle and be that creature of comfort, because that's the only thing we know. We know toxicity. We know being hurt, or we feel ashamed, or we're embarrassed, or we feel guilty. But you gotta hold on. You gotta move forward, and that's what it provides us.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess then, like on the part of self-awareness, like how can people be more mindful of like when their mana is being drained, or if they're draining other people's mana? Like, are there any, I don't know, practices, routines, protocols, stuff that, because I feel like it's a daily practice, right? This is not something that you just do for today and then tomorrow is like throwing them in the opala, right? Like, yeah, I'd just be curious about that.
So in Ho'amana, we teach 3 basic forms of awareness, consciousness. Is kilo, which is to observe; kauna, which is finding the hidden meanings, understanding these layers; and makavalu, to understand perspective, but not perspective through your eyes or through your mind, but like a deeper understanding of levels, being able to dive into spaces. And so that's the thing. It is universal. It's not cultural. The understanding of conscious awareness. That's it. Because once you're conscious and you're aware, it's a lot easier. And now, whether or not you're tolerant of certain situations, that's going to be individualistic. Like that, everybody, I have high tolerance, so I have a lot of more patience. But at the end of the day, not everybody has that, and they're quickly drained. And I also run on high mana, so like you can't really deplete all of my mana. I know how to replenish my mana. So I think that's why I can be more tolerant and patient, because as one gets taken, I have means and I understand myself well enough to replenish that really easy. But when I'm like done replenishing, like I just need a rest. Yeah, you kind of gotta hold up from that. You kind of gotta let it go. And so the managing part is building your consciousness. It's like really being considerate of others. And I'll say this over and over again in these Mana Bombs podcasts, is the fact that most people, probably 99% of people I know, are more self-centered than centered in self. And that's what gets you in trouble. And I believe the self-centeredness came from a point, this is from my understanding and my experience, is that during COVID, it made people go inwards. It really made people think about themselves. Like they had to literally sit in silence and like figure out life and their meaning of life. And then you understood who valued you and who didn't value you. And I think at that point, it really shifted the mindset of individuals. And so when they realized that they had worth and they had value, they quickly turned around and made everything centered around them. You need to talk to me like this. I need this and you need that. And no, you can't do this. What happened was when they were asserting their boundaries and asserting who they were, they ended up stealing other people's mana. So that mana, that's the irony in all of this. That mana that was stolen from them, that got them to that place, they became the enemy. And they became the people that hurt them. And so now we live in a world of people being inconsiderate, you know, the Karens, the a-holes, the whatevers.
Right.
Everything got to center around them to make them comfortable. But they forget they are still one piece of the bigger puzzle. They are a particle. They are a particle to the whole. Right. And then once we understand that level of consciousness, that whole becomes a particle of another whole. And that whole becomes a particle of another whole. It's endless. And it's beyond words. And if as a cultural practitioner, as a cultural person, or somebody who lives in Hawaii, who understands elements, you're this big compared to the mountain. And you start to gain a different perspective. And that's that perspective, Makavalo, you got to really think about. So I think that's where that management, you got to pull back again, because you're going to get humbled. And if you don't humble yourself, like I really, truly, absolutely did believe the universe will humble you for you.
Absolutely. Humble yourself so that the universe doesn't have to do it. And I think like the best analogy that I can offer is like when you go on an airplane and you're up high and you see how small, you know, things are, like how you are in comparison to like the bigger picture, which is like exactly what you're saying. And those are the times when I'm reminded even more so than I try to be on a daily basis, like, yeah, wow, look at all of that. And what is the thing that you're worrying about? Like, it's so small in the big picture, you know? And I think just, you know, like especially for like, okay, so like in Hawaii, so it's easier to feel connected to the nature around you because you're like in it. But I think even like where I live, you know, obviously everybody has nature, but I think you have to be more intentional about like reconnecting with it. And sometimes like as opposed to like being from the plane looking down, sometimes I gotta just like lay down in the grass and just look up, you know, like, and just be like, okay, yeah, like there's just something that happens. It's not a word. It's just you feel that connection, and that's how I personally reground. Like no matter where I am, especially like last week when I was having like, I don't know, work was giving me like anxiety, and I was like, okay, I gotta put my feet in the ground because this thing needs to get off of me. Like I cannot with this toxic energy, right? And so like it does take intentional work, and you have to be super aware of yourself. So yeah, mahalo for that, because you're right. It's not cultural. It's a universal truth and a universal connection, and you know, it's the journey for all of us. So yeah, mahalo for that.
I think one of those things too, like in those situations when you're around coworkers, that's the hardest one to you know, because you know, I will say that personally, even as a person who, like, if you're not working for somebody, but you're working, like some folks work with you. I don't want to say for you. They work with you, but you hold a position in which you don't have that. Like if you quit, everything falls. Like literally there is nothing, you know? And there have been moments in my spaces where like folks I worked with, I was like, I quit. Like, I don't even want to work with all of you. I will give up the whole organization to get out of here. And then I have to go like, I cannot do that. Right. But trust me, I've had to walk to the edge of that one multiple times. And then that's why when people are gone, I'm like, yay. No offense, but I mean it's real, like some people just come with very, very toxic behaviors, and that's that entitlement. That's that negativity, that always complaining and not giving. They're taking more than they give. So there's no balance in that. So my point is like in those situations, yeah, eventually we have to look at them. Are they toxic? And how do we define toxic? Because it may feel toxic, but that feeling of feeling toxic and feeling like it's affecting you toxic just could be a trigger for you to go and get grounded so that you can come back and do the work. So like I was sharing with you earlier, people can deplete you, but if you don't know yourself well and you're conscious of who you are and what you need, that's where you have to be able to fill in that mana. And that's where you are able to like really have more longevity, really be more sustainable in those spaces, and, be able to manage and work through it. Because otherwise it's just one way, And so the consciousness and awareness can put you in any given situation that is toxic, heavy, and hard, and you will still pull through. So here's a philosophy I learned through my martial arts, through my grandfather, through Ho'amana, is we first build the boundary, then we master the boundary, and then later we get rid of the boundary, and you're back to ground zero again. And when you're back to ground zero again at the other end, it's because it's natural. But those things that we have to set forth are only crutches until we know how to master them. Right? So you have to make, do, and then undo. And the undo is your ultimate goal. If that makes any sense.
Oh, absolutely. Yep. Build the boundary, master the boundary, undo the boundary. I love it.
It's like, I always think of it as like Miyagi-san, like like flashlight, wipe on, wipe off, up, down, or whatever,
Back to the basics. Like a lot of it really is just going back to the basics and recentering yourself, for sure.
Yeah. So I think if we keep our eye on that prize, then we understand that well. But you have to get to a point where you know yourself well. Consciousness of self is so powerful. It is absolutely the medicine, the only medicine that you need to heal yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, all of that. Yeah.
No, I definitely agree. And like for myself, I know that's an area I've definitely been growing a lot. And the more that I understand myself and like acknowledge the things that make me me and the stuff that I need, like the more peace has come into, my life, because I just like, I need to fix it. Nobody can fix it because nobody knows me better than me. Right. So.
Exactly. And you think about kupuna, our elders who have lived a long life, 60, 70, 80, get those ones, Dramalanis and stress, like they call for it. They like that. Yeah. And then you have those very olu kupuna who are just like, okay, come baby, let it go. It's okay. It's because it's not, they realize how tiny it is, and time will pass and things will happen. And people say they don't believe time heals, and I actually believe that time does heal. The problem is you never gave yourself enough time. So those who are impatient and like want it now, time will never heal. But you gotta have that Moana Nui. You gotta have that patience, and you also have to believe. Your first thing is to believe, and that's that. I think that bypasses all cultures and all religions. Believe. What do they call it in church? Faith. So for me, it's like I do have faith, but beyond faith is now I believe, because it's done. Right?
Mahalo. Alrighty, well, I think that was an awesome start for our Manaba Monday. Any last words of wisdom, T, before we sign off for today?
No, just be the uns and uns everybody else. Yeah, but
we gotta make a shirt now. Uns.
Yeah, uns. When you hear somebody say, "Oh, she's uns," you know why. But yeah, signing off from the island of Molokai. It's me, Kanoelani Davis, Manabams, powered by Pō Mahina Designs. Mahalo.
Awesome. And Moana signing off for Moana Nui podcast. See you guys next week on our next episode of Mana Bombs. Ahui ho kako.
Ahuyo.
So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If they won't tell it, we will.
If this the land of the free, it was a freedom then. When they annexed Hawaii and called it Cedar Lands, without any type of payment and no signing off. Called themselves a republic in 1894. 1.2 million acres overtaken from the native Hawaiians. When they resisted, the West retaliated in violence and erasure. The Hawaiian language is banned as part of colonialism's plan to expand, yeah.
Stuck between a rock and a hard place. Multiple bombings of Kanoelani as a part of their ongoing war with Asia. Used it as a place for target practice. No consent or compensation. Colonizers call for annexation. No work out for all the locals. School will never let you know. So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If they won't tell it, we will. Too many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If they won't tell it, we will. We will.
So if you put Hawaii into perspective, well, Black and Asian history is interconnected. Considering the fight with the Pacific, then of course, versus Asia, they was treated as a middleman for war, but didn't let the Western colorism run its course, cause dark skin was a sign of dignity to core. The land was taken in the name of capitalism, when prior to it was an actual kingdom. Clap back at the system.
Stuck between a rock and a hard place. Multiple bombings of Kanoelani as a part of their ongoing war with Asia. Used it as a place for target practice. No consent or compensation. Colonizers call for annexation. No work out for all the locals. School will never let you know. So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If they won't tell it, we will. Too many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If they won't tell it, we will. So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If they won't tell it, we will. Too many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If they won't tell it, we will.